Hello, this is Steven Al, and yes, we are back with another Green Hornet 66 episode review. And today, we'll be reviewing the episode The Praying Mantis. So without any further ado, let's get straight into this review. We begin the episode with a mysterious stranger going to a nearby telephone booth and ends up calling Britt Reed's apartment. The man in question is a guy named Jimmy Key. Jimmy Key. And informs Britt Reed how the newspaper has been trying to smash a protection racket that's operating in the local little Chinatown area, and tells him to come to the Golden Lotus Cafe for more answers to this question. He then hangs up. Britt Reed, curious about the whole thing, tells Kato to get the Black Beauty ready and how they are going and have to go down to this Golden Lotus restaurant immediately. And Kato seems to know this, and they get ready to go. Whilst that's happening, we then cut to one of our two main villains of this episode, an up-and-coming gangster, an enforcer, named Lo Sing, who leads the local who's leading a faction of the local Tongs, and is about to go into the Golden Lotus Cafe. But Jimmy Key blocks him, and essentially tells him, to get out. Lo Sing, being a bit of a hothead, not liking to be, told, knocks him out. He and his gang then go into the Golden Lotus where they try to essentially, extort protection money out of the owner. But the owner ends up attacking, one of Lo Sing's henchmen, but Lo Sing makes good work of him. They end up wrecking the place, and the owner's daughter ends up coming in and into the restaurant to her father's, defense, and then the guys kind of make their escape. We do the usual opening credits, and then, of course, we get back to where we left off. Lo Sing and his men are about to leave, but Lo Sing ends up leaving one of the masks he wore on Jimmy Key to make it look like he was one of the robbers. Just as the Black Beauty begins to haul up, Lo Sing and his gang quickly run off. The Green Hornet goes to look over Jimmy Key, while Kato goes to search for one of the gang members. Not finding one, however, he does get a surprise ambush by Lo Sing, and he makes his escape. Kato, upset by this, and is furious. This is clearly to enhance a bit of a rivalry between these two characters later on in this episode. As they make their way back, the Green Hornet asks what's happened, and he said, and basically, he'll explain to him later. They end up driving off. The owner's daughter also happens to be essentially the girlfriend to Jimmy Key, and she comes to the conclusion that he was part of the member that robbed the place and trashed the whole restaurant and ended up injuring her father, but he says no, he's innocent, and runs off. We then go back to Britt Reed's apartment, where he explains to Scanlon that Jimmy Key had no involvement in the robbery, as he was unconscious during the whole thing, but they think the gang might be after him to no doubt spill on possible members. As a result, Frank Scanlon gets every available man on the force to help track him down. Now, whilst all this craziness is happening, we go to essentially one of the gang's local hideouts, where Lo Sing is essentially talking to his men. Just as that happening, the boss comes in, the head of the protection rackets himself, Duke Slate, who comes in and tells him we got to, what you're doing, how you're operating is unacceptable. We need them to pay the money, and how they're going to do that if you put them in the hospital, or worse, a cemetery. But they need to find Jimmy Key immediately, as he's the only one of the Tongs that's not with Lo Sing, and essentially, could jeopardize their plan. Now, even though Lo Sing works for Duke Slate, there's a bit of a rivalry here. Again, he's a complete hothead. Not really the type to take orders, but he's got a job to do. Just as Duke Slate and his boys are leaving the hideout, he ends up getting observed by Mike Axford, who happens to be down there. He then goes back to the Daily Sentinel and inform Reed about what he saw, Duke Slate within the area. They then come to the conclusion that the conclusion that the protection racket is being run by him. He already controls a lot of it on the west side, and clearly seeks expanding into the local Chinatown district. But Reed tells him to keep a lid on this until they have all the facts straightened out, and Axford agrees. On his way out, I love how he gets the little saying how there are moments like this where he can see his old dad in him after all. Rest his soul. Just as that whole thing's and we get a nice little chuckle where Casey, teases Reed, saying that's probably the highest compliment you'll ever receive from him. We then, of course, cut to the girlfriend, who, has been in contact with Jimmy Key, and ends up calling essentially Reed where Jimmy Key is in hiding to make sure that he gets protection. And he says he's going to send Case over to her so that way she can also be protected as well from the gang, as she said she's believed to be followed. And she is right. She ends up getting kidnapped by Lo Sing and his gang. The Green Hornet and Kato manage to go to Jimmy Key's where he's been hiding out, but whilst Jimmy Key tried to make an escape, he ends up getting knocked unconscious. But at least they got him alive, and the gang, and not the other gang. However, the Green Hornet does get a phone call from Casey saying that the girlfriend has been kidnapped. And realizing Jimmy Key will not endanger her safety, the only logical alternative is to go to Duke Slade and order some kind of arrangement. As a result, we see that this was Lo Sing's plan. Knowing that she'll be kidnapped, this will bring Jimmy Key out of hiding for her safety. But of course, the Green Hornet bursts in and again tries to broker a deal. A deal that he has Jimmy Key in exchange for money, but he also wants the girl to be let free, as the Green Hornet believes that she'll be worth some money to her father if he recovers. I like how immediately Kato and Lo Sing have a bit of the standoff. Something I like is the two are really polar opposites. The big karate, I guess you would call it, or essentially really skilled fighters, and there's a bit of tension between the two. And you can clearly see that Duke Slade is finding it hard to keep Lo Sing more under his control as we go through on the episode. We then go back to the Green Hornet's apartment, where he tells Frank Scanlon the plan for him and his men to come once they've rounded up the gang. And the only reason I have to do this because I've got to make sure Jimmy Key and the girl get out of this, unharmed, and Frank Scanlon agrees. But just as always, there's always double-crossing in the air. The Green Hornet and Kato take Jimmy Key and the Black Beauty to the rendezvous for this exchange, which ironically is the same place Jimmy Key was hiding earlier in the episode. But Duke Slade and two of his men are already there, ready to ambush the Green Hornet, but, well, the Green Hornet is always one step ahead, and ends up essentially ambushing Duke Slade and his men and forcing him to go for this exchange. When we get inside, we get Lo Sing and all his men having this sort of standoff. In exchange for they'll take the girl, they can have Jimmy Key and the money. But the Green Hornet finds out there is no money, and it's a sort of ambush. The Green Hornet ends up taking on Duke Slade and his two henchmen, while Kato ends up taking down Lo Sing's gang. And it is absolutely great. I wish it could have gone a bit longer, and more scenes really focused on Kato really fighting Lo Sing's men, but it is what it is. Eventually it ends up with most of the men knocked out, and Duke Slade's two henchmen knocked out. By this point, Lo Sing has essentially no longer works for Slade and now operates on his own, and essentially plans to take on the Green Hornet. But he says, if you're the part of the Tongs, isn't there a more traditional way that this is done? And decides that there needs to be a fight between Kato and Lo Sing. Now, Lo Sing at first does not want to go through with it, but Green Hornet coaxes him into doing it by saying if he doesn't, then he's essentially just this big coward. And how much respect would your men have for you if you back down? He's angry at the thought of being even considered a coward. He calls it enough, and a nice karate fight between Lo Sing and Kato busts out. This is something we've been waiting for this entire episode, and it's a good fight. I wished it could have gone longer, and I wouldn't mind have been drawn out because it was so much build up to this fight. But of course, this is Bruce Lee, of course, and he ends up winning. And just as Duke Slate tries to get out his gun, Green Hornet knocks him out. Jimmy Key ends up taking control of the Tong and saying that the criminal ways of how it is run are over now and needs to be returned back to the more traditionalism of his father. Green Hornet and Kato's mission over, they then rush out, but not before giving a nice little call to Frank Scanlon, to come in with the reinforcements. Just as just as the Black Beauty drives off, the policeman car comes in, and as the policemen rush into the doors, Frank just looks on in amazement on how they managed to get away, and I love that little smile. We end the episode with the owner of the Golden Lotus, fully recovered, having a dinner with Britt Reed, Casey, Mike Axford, Jimmy Key, and the girlfriend, just having a nice dinner. Interesting fact, the owner of the Golden Lotus was actually the actor playing him, if I recall correctly, played Kato in the first 2 Green Hornet movie serials. So that's a bit of interesting thing there. Anyway, but it ends with Mike apparently getting a phone call from one of his police friends saying that the Green Hornet is, pulling off this robbery and they need to go and see it. But of course, it ends with a bit of with Britt Reed really not being that fully, motivated as usual. We end the episode there. Okay, I like how the little bit here Mike Axford gets to do in this episode, and the same with Frank Scanlon. Frank Scanlon and Mike Axford get little to do, but they're really crucial to the story. I like Mike's especially when he goes to Britt Reed saying how he's identified this big gangster and believing he could be in charge of the protection racket. I like how Reed agrees with him, but tells him to keep the lid on this until all the facts are straightened out. Not just that a smart move, but Mike respects it in saying there's a bit of his father still left in him. But the biggest thing I love is how Kato is finally given more to do in this episode. Instead of being just really driving around and getting involved in mediocre fights, or at least okay fights, the favorite bit is how he has an actual rival that gets on his nerves every now and again when they keep meeting. His pride is hurt when he gets knocked out by this guy who did a sneaky move and really just wants to take down this guy. In fact, in the episode when he says, when we meet up with this guy again, I want him. And Britt Reed says, you got him. Casey really kind of falls like to not really be involved. But that's just that. And of course, the Green Hornet is always there. But let's talk about the villain. The villains this time around are essentially just 2 gangsters. Duke Slate, who was portrayed by Tom Drake, and Lo Sing, portrayed by Mako. And essentially, I like how these 2 gangsters have complete polarizing opposites. Lo Sing is clearly the henchman, but really aspiring to be more than just this underappreciated underling. But Duke Slate is really in charge and tries to think more calmly, and thinks because his boss can kind of push him around a bit. The relationship is is interesting as it kind of deteriorates, makes it very fun and interesting. While Duke Slate is really nothing more than just your average, run-of-the-mill gangster, villain of the week. Lo Sing is a really interesting character. He's this aspiring guy, very much a hothead, thinks very big of himself, and I like at one point he almost became a bit of a coward. But when wanting to fight, but once the Green Hornet calls him out, he then fights. I also love the idea that this is Kato's arch nemesis, a rival. But make it in a more proper criminal circumstances. I wouldn't mind of Lo Sing coming back. Now, from what I recall, Lo Sing's actor Mako was not, I think, Chinese. He was a different ethnic background, but it was back then, and if you look Oriental, it's all the same. Again, it was back then in the 60s, and it's just a fact I think needs to be addressed. The Praying Mantis is perhaps some of the best episodes of the series, and the thing that makes it stand out is just the idea of Kato or Bruce Lee finally getting more to do rather than driving and just being part of the background. I think he takes more center stage this time around. This is obviously some of the most iconic episodes of the series, up there with a few more that I'll mention some further point down the line. Also behind the scenes, Bruce Lee was suffering from a bit of racism behind the scene. And Van Williams, who played the Green Hornet, was always telling the producers to give Kato more to do and give him more of the screen time. It's clear that people are tuning in because of Bruce Lee. But of course, it was the 60s back then, and I think that definitely played into why the show was doomed. I'm not saying that Kato should have been overtaking the Green Hornet, just saying have him on the same level of Robin, having more equal screen time and have some episodes centered around him, just as you have some episodes centered around the Green Hornet, 50-50. This is a really good episode, really fun, and I think that we got arguably one of the few villains in the series to be very interesting to me. This is a really good episode. There we have it. That was The Praying Mantis. Join us next time in another Green Hornet 66 episode review. But until next time, this has been the Steven Hour, and ladies and gentlemen, so long for now.